Hey there, welcome to Sleepy History Secrets, the channel where beauty is pain and pain is, apparently, fashion. Tonight we're taking a calm little stroll through the world of medieval beauty, that delightful corner of history where devotion met dermatology and the church somehow had opinions about your eyebrows. So before you settle in, take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy falling asleep to humanity's bad decisions. And when you're ready, drop a comment telling us where you're listening from and what time it is right now. It's oddly comforting to know how many of us are awake at the wrong hour, together, contemplating ancient skincare. Now, dim the lights, maybe let a fan hum softly in the background, because tonight we're exploring what it actually took to look beautiful in the Middle Ages, and why most of it would land you in a dermatology ward today. If your mind drifts off halfway through, don't worry. You'll still wake up paler, at least spiritually. So, let's begin. Right at the mirror's edge of medieval Europe, where the ideal complexion was 1 part holiness, 2 parts heavy metal. Imagine waking up in the 14th century. There's frost on the window, a faint smell of smoke in the air, and somewhere in the distance a rooster is questioning its life choices. You splash your face with what passes for water, grey, cold, and faintly medieval. Then you look in a small polished piece of metal that calls itself a mirror, and you ask yourself the eternal question, do I look pure enough to survive today? Because in the Middle Ages, beauty wasn't just vanity, it was virtue. A pale, almost ghostly complexion meant moral superiority. It said, I'm rich enough to stay indoors and pious enough to look half dead. The ideal woman resembled a saint caught halfway between life and canonization. The church, of course, approved. Paleness meant modesty, chastity, and the absence of outdoor labour, which in a time without sunscreen or soap was quite the achievement. Tanned skin was for farmers, servants, and people with visible biceps, none of whom were invited to courtly poetry readings. If you were born with a healthy glow, congratulations, you now had a problem. You needed to look sick, fast. That meant covering your natural colour with lead carbonate powder, known poetically as Venetian ceruse. It was made by suspending thin sheets of lead over vinegar until the metal corroded, flaked and turned white. Then, naturally, people ground it up and put it on their faces. Beauty standards, as it turns out, have always required at least a little bit of chemistry and denial. The logic was simple: the whiter, the better. So noble women dusted their skin until they looked like ghosts attending a masquerade. Men joined in too. Pale cheeks showed refinement, and dying from slow lead poisoning was just part of the charm. Lead absorbed through the skin caused tremors, tooth loss and paralysis, but it gave your complexion a certain luminosity, the kind that came from internal organ failure. You could tell someone's social status by how close they were to fainting. Meanwhile, peasants had to make do with whatever dirt didn't stain. Their version of skincare involved staying alive long enough for their skin to become calloused enough that it stopped caring. If you were lucky, your natural tone was considered earthy. If not, it was just dirt. The wealthy, though, they embraced the aesthetic of divine fragility. Pain was elegance. A noble woman with perfectly powdered cheeks looked like porcelain, and often cracked just as easily. Of course, not everyone could afford imported lead, so there were local alternatives: chalk, flour, or ground alabaster mixed with vinegar or milk. A sort of medieval foundation, though foundation might be generous for something that fell off in the rain. If you needed a glow, you might add a hint of egg white or mercury. Yes, mercury. It added shine and texture and occasionally madness. The perfect combination for social success. Looking at period portraits, you might think these people were serene, but they weren't calm. They were just trying not to blink as their skin slowly burned. And yet, despite the pain, the practice persisted for centuries. Because beauty wasn't personal, it was public theology. Your face was proof of your virtue, your breeding, and your budget. The paler you were, the closer you looked to divine light, or at least to your own funeral. Even literature joined in. Poets wrote odes comparing women to lilies, ivory or moonlight, basically any object that hadn't seen the sun in years. A good complexion was an act of devotion. A bad one was moral decay, or worse, evidence of a life spent outdoors. So, you learned to hide every freckle. Every hint of colour was an accusation, and slowly, day by day, you became exactly what society wanted, a perfect, trembling alabaster sermon. Because in the end, medieval beauty wasn't about attraction, it was about appearing untouchable, so flawless, so pale and so poisoned that even God might hesitate to touch you. And that, as they would have said, was what passed for the face of virtue. You begin your morning ritual with confidence, or at least with the conviction that beauty requires commitment and possibly minor industrial waste. On the wooden table before you sits an array of ingredients that could either purify the soul or end your circulatory system. It's hard to tell which, and no one ever asks. First, you prepare your Venetian ceruse, that white powder of legend, the secret to eternal youth and gradual paralysis. It begins its life as lead, soaked in vinegar until it corrodes into a fine, soft crust of poison. You crush the flakes gently, almost reverently, until they resemble snow. Then you mix them with water, milk, or sometimes a few drops of rosewater if you're feeling luxurious. The smell is metallic and sour, like the scent of good intentions turning. You apply it to your face using a scrap of linen, smoothing it across your cheeks until your skin looks like polished bone. You look clean, pure, and faintly embalmed. The sting in your pores assures you it's working. If you want to add a glow, you might beat in a little egg white for that subtle shine of moral superiority. It dries quickly, tightening your face into something between serenity and rigor mortis. Some women dust on a layer of chalk or ground alabaster to finish the look, the medieval version of setting powder. Others use breadcrumbs mixed with honey for exfoliation, though the flies tend to appreciate that more than your reflection does. Perfume follows, a few drops of rosewater or lavender if you're wealthy enough to drown out the vinegar. For those less fortunate, a dab of wine works almost as well and doubles as emotional support. The mixture is heady, sharp, and faintly tragic, the exact scent of ambition in liquid form. Of course, none of this lasts. Humidity ruins everything, so you reapply. Throughout the day, you carry a small tin of powder, touching up every time someone mentions sin or sunlight. If the lid starts to flake, you dab on more vinegar to seal it back in. Beauty maintenance, 14th century edition. Underneath the mask, your real skin begins to darken, blister, and itch. But no one sees that part. The fashionable phrase is a fair countenance, not a medically stable one. When your cheeks begin to swell or peel, you can always cover them with a beauty patch, a small black silk dot glued over the damage. They come in different shapes, crescent moons, stars, sometimes hearts. From a distance, it looks flirtatious. Up close, it's camouflage. The first form of romantic deception was apparently dermatological. If you're running low on powder, cheaper alternatives abound. Flour, chalk, or even crushed bones will do in a pinch. The goal isn't realism, the goal is hierarchy. A flawless face says you belong indoors, where the air is thin and the food decorative. Men join the game too. Knights, courtiers, even clergy use pale powders before public appearances. Because holiness, like fashion, photographs better in moonlight. A few medical voices protest. Some physicians quietly warn that Venetian whiteness corrupts the humours, a medieval way of saying it might kill you. But their warnings fall on powdered ears. Vanity moves faster than medicine, and besides, illness is an acceptable side effect when it's fashionable. To finish your transformation, You might trace your lips with crushed berries or wine dregs, only enough to suggest you're alive. Too much colour, and someone might call you French, which depending on the century could mean anything from worldly to possibly cursed. When you finally catch your reflection again, you don't see fatigue or poverty or fear. You see the face society promised, pale, pure, untouchable. You've erased your pores, your freckles, your warmth, and possibly a decade of your lifespan. But for now, it's worth it. Because beauty, in this world, is proof of control. Control over nature, over decay, and over your own common sense. The sting of vinegar fades, the smell lingers, and as you breathe it in, you almost believe that perfection really does come from suffering. Almost. There's something suspicious about looking alive in the Middle Ages. Colour in the face was a dangerous luxury, a signal that you might have emotions, or worse, circulation. Paleness was purity. Stillness was grace. But eventually someone looked in the mirror and thought, perhaps holiness could use a little contrast. And thus, medieval rouge was born, the forbidden spark of colour on a corpse-pale canvas. It started simply enough. Crushed flowers, berries, or wine sediment dabbed onto the cheeks. Some used cochineal, a dye made from ground insects that had travelled all the way from the east. Others preferred the domestic route, red wine mixed with pig fat, a sort of devotional charcuterie. Applied sparingly, it gave the impression of warmth, or at the very least circulation. Of course, the church wasn't thrilled. A woman with rosy cheeks was considered temptation embodied, an agent of distraction for good Christian men who, incidentally, were always the ones staring. Sermons described painted women as vessels of deceit. Parish records mention confessions involving unholy pigments. Some theologians even claim the devil himself invented rouge to simulate the blush of innocence. Still, it caught on. Because nothing reinforces a trend like public condemnation. You, being sensible, mix your rouge from the safer ingredients. A dash of wine, a pinch of cinnamon, maybe a drop of animal fat to make it stick. It smells faintly of the tavern, which is appropriate. The tavern being the one place you're not supposed to smell like. The process is delicate. A little too much and you look scandalous. Too little and you look deceased. The sweet spot is, possibly anemic, but with spirit. You apply it with a fingertip, gently patting colour into your cheeks, then blot it off again to prove your modesty. If you're noble, your maid does it for you. She keeps the brush hidden when priests visit, like a medieval spy operation. If you're poor, you make do with a pinch and a prayer. Either way, the result is the same, a faint forbidden warmth on a face otherwise designed for sainthood. By the 14th century, recipes became more ambitious. A few manuals suggested adding mercury or vermilion for extra brightness. Ingredients that could, and often did, remove several layers of face in the process. Others proposed using burnt almonds, ochre, or dried blood, because symbolism was nothing if not literal. Doctors objected, of course. They always do. One medieval physician wrote that painting the face inflames the humours and endangers chastity, which was an elegant way of saying you might die attractively. The church took it further. Red cheeks became evidence of sin itself. If you looked flushed, it meant lust. If you didn't, it meant envy. If you tried to fix either, it meant pride. You could never win, only blend. Meanwhile, men participated too, just more discreetly. A hint of red wax or saffron to suggest vitality during courtship. Knights returning from battle dabbed rouge to hide exhaustion. Even monks were rumoured to use rosewater on feast days, for the glory of God, presumably, or at least the abbot. Rouge had practical uses as well. It hid bruises from tight headgear, frostbite, or the occasional domestic miracle. In winter, a dab of pigment convinced others you hadn't frozen yet. Beauty and survival blurred pleasantly together. But make no mistake, the line between adornment and sin remained razor thin. Moral writers warned that any woman who, coloured her face unnaturally, risked losing her soul. Some even said the paint itself was cursed. If a man kissed you while you wore it, he'd inherit your sins and possibly your rash. Ironically, the church's outrage only fueled creativity. Women began hiding their cosmetics in prayer boxes, labelling pigments as healing ointments. Apothecaries sold angel powders and holy balms that suspiciously matched popular shades of blush. Vanity became an act of quiet rebellion, one brushstroke of resistance against piety's pale tyranny. You finish applying yours carefully. The red blends softly into white, giving you the look of someone who has just come back from the brink of mortality, which, in fairness, you might have. When you catch your reflection, you don't see sin or sanctity. You see balance, the calm defiance of a world that fears warmth. The mirror offers no moral judgment, only a silent observation that life, in all its frailty, sometimes looks better with a little colour. Outside, the wind carries the scent of ash and cold iron. Inside, your cheeks glow faintly against the candlelight. For one fleeting moment, you appear almost human again, and that, in medieval terms, is already too much. By now, your face is a fragile masterpiece. Layers of devotion, deception, and early chemistry balance precariously between elegance and exfoliation. But in the medieval imagination, there was always room for improvement. And by improvement, they meant another layer. The ideal complexion was not merely pale, it was absolute, as if life itself had politely withdrawn from your face, leaving only a luminous memory behind. Artists painted saints and noble women the same way, smooth, expressionless, impossibly white. The goal wasn't realism, it was transcendence. To look human was to admit weakness. To look polished and porcelain was to aspire toward heaven, or at least toward the upper class. To achieve that sacred stillness, you reach again for your lead powder, already mixed with vinegar and milk, and pat on another thin coat. The powder drifts into the air like holy dust. It settles on your lashes, your lips, your lungs. You cough once, then politely ignore the taste of metal. Everyone does. Then comes the egg white glaze, the medieval version of highlighter. You whip it with a twig until it foams, then smooth it over your cheeks and forehead. As it dries, your skin tightens to the texture of parchment. Smiling becomes a sin of physics. But the sheen, oh, the sheen. Candlelight bounces off your face like sunlight off a tomb. Still, even perfection has imperfections. Maybe a small blemish peeks through. Maybe yesterday's lead reaction has bloomed into something inconveniently biological. No problem. You simply cover it with a beauty patch, a tiny piece of black silk shaped like a moon, a heart, or a star. It clings to the skin with tree resin or for the effluent bat's blood, apparently stickier. From across the hall, the patch looks flirtatious. Up close, it's a bandage. You've invented makeup's first lie, hiding disease behind charm. Every dot tells a story, none of them romantic. Some women place patches near the corner of the mouth to suggest wit, or by the eye to imply melancholy. Courtiers even wrote manuals assigning symbolic meaning to each location. A patch on the cheek meant gracious. On the chin meant passionate. On the forehead, philosophical. The same effect could probably be achieved by talking, but that was rarely as fashionable. If you have scars or lesions too large for patchwork, there's always mercury salve, guaranteed to lighten, disinfect, and slowly end you. Applied nightly, it fades spots by dissolving the top layer of skin, along with several moral boundaries. The scent of vinegar and sour milk fills the room, mingling with candle smoke and faint incense. You dab your wrists with rose oil to disguise it, though nothing can quite cover the metallic undernote. The air itself feels heavy, as if beauty has a weight. When you're finally finished, the mirror offers back something both impressive and unnerving. You look timeless, smooth, luminous and quietly exhausted. The pale mask conceals the living person underneath. You could attend court, confession, or your own funeral without changing a thing. Portrait painters adore this look. They call it noble translucence. It translates beautifully into oil and myth. Viewers will one day mistake this pallor for serenity, never realizing it was the color of chronic exposure. By evening, the mask begins to crack. Every smile leaves a fissure, every word a tiny avalanche of powder. You learn to move less, to breathe shallowly, to exist gently, like a statue afraid of disappointing its sculptor. At night, you scrape off what remains with a cloth soaked in wine or urine, whichever is closer. The process stings, removes a layer of skin and a portion of your faith. Tomorrow you'll do it again, because in a society that measured morality by complexion, stopping would look suspiciously like freedom. Still, there's a strange pride in the ritual. Beneath the absurdity lies the quiet logic of survival. A pale face could open doors, earn respect, even marriage. The price was only long-term neurological decline, which seemed fair enough. You blow out the candle and catch your reflection one last time. Faint, colourless, angelic. For a brief second, you understand the appeal. It's peace, or something like it. And then a patch falls off, revealing the blister beneath. Perfection, it seems, requires maintenance. You've conquered the complexion. You now glow faintly in candlelight like a marble relic, half alive, half aspirational. But in the grand hierarchy of medieval aesthetics, your forehead still lets you down. It's too small, too mortal, too full of inconvenient thoughts like, this burns and why am I doing this? Because in the Middle Ages, intelligence had a measurable surface area, and it began right above your eyebrows. The higher the forehead, the higher the mind. A broad, smooth expanse of skin was a sign of nobility, composure, and inner light. Essentially, the more you looked like a slightly surprised saint, the better. So you begin the daily ritual of improvement, with tweezers, wax, and a patience that only ignorance can sustain. One hair at a time, you pluck back the frontiers of reason. Each tiny sting is proof of devotion. Soon, your hairline retreats like a medieval army, slow, painful, and badly planned. You pause, studying your reflection. The result is promising. A growing blank field of forehead, smooth and thoughtful. You look intelligent now, also startled, possibly haunted, but you're not finished. Some patches resist the holy cause of beauty. That's where quicklime and arsenic paste come in, the medieval equivalent of laser treatment, minus the safety or precision. You mix the lime with vinegar until it fizzes, then smear it across your scalp while whispering a prayer you genuinely mean this time. The mixture burns instantly, eating away at the stubborn follicles and your sense of self-preservation. You hold it for a few minutes, or until smoke appears, whichever comes first. As the pain sharpens, you tell yourself that true beauty is transcendence, and transcendence always hurts. Besides, the manuals promised results. They just didn't specify whether those results included eyebrows. When it's over, you rinse with cold water, the medieval cure for everything from poison to regret. Your skin tingles, you smell faintly of chalk and vengeance, and as you gently pat your scalp dry, you remind yourself that the saints suffered too. For the truly ambitious, there's vinegar of lead, a gentle wash meant to purify the forehead. It adds a pale sheen and a lifetime of neurological decline, but it's worth it. Your head now gleams like a theological argument polished for court presentation. The fashion spreads quickly. Across Europe, noblewomen compete for the most expansive foreheads, each trying to outthink the others visually. Poets compare them to ivory gates of wisdom and the moon's serene brow. Painters exaggerate them until entire faces look like inverted domes with decorative features attached near the chin. The forehead becomes a symbol of virtue, intelligence, and mildly concerning obsession. Of course, not everyone approves. Priests warn that excessive grooming invites vanity, and vanity invites damnation. But the Church also praises women who reflect divine light, and frankly, that's easier to do without bangs. Meanwhile, men participate in quieter ways. Scholars shave their temples to show scholarly fatigue. Clerics trim their tonsures wider, until some look less like holy men and more like candles burning at both ends. Everyone agrees that hair in general distracts from the soul. In towns, barbershops buzz with the gossip of scorched scalps. You overhear one woman boasting that her new lime paste works so well she can feel her thoughts cooling in the wind. Another swears by arsenic mixed with egg yolk for shine and longevity. No one asks how long. You apply ointment, then step outside to test your achievement. The winter air kisses your freshly exposed skin like a knife made of theology. A small bird lands nearby, briefly mistaking your head for a church dome. Success. Neighbours notice too. They nod politely, whispering admiration. A noble woman with a forehead large enough to host a minor council meeting was clearly destined for greatness, or at least for conversation pieces in poetry. But this ritual isn't just fashion, it's faith disguised as grooming. Removing hair was symbolic, clearing away the earthly to make space for the divine. Every plucked follicle was a small surrender of vanity to holiness, or depending on the lighting, the reverse. Either way, suffering was the proof of sincerity, and if it scarred, if the skin blistered or discoloured, that only added character. Beauty born of pain, they said, as if the phrase were a commandment rather than an observation. By nightfall, your head throbs softly. The smell of vinegar lingers. You can almost feel your pulse under the skin, the heartbeat of ambition trapped beneath an expanding sky. When you touch your brow, it's smooth and warm, almost feverish. But in the dim candlelight, it shines, and that's what matters. In a world where appearance was morality and pain was proof of depth, you've done well. You look intelligent now, not because you are, but because you've removed the evidence to the contrary. Your forehead is now a triumph of self-inflicted intellect, gleaming with moral clarity and chemical residue, but no one will notice your enlightened cranium if your hair still looks earthly. Because in the late Middle Ages, beauty demanded contrast. The paler your skin, the lighter your hair should be. Golden locks whispered nobility, chastity, and a suspicious relationship with sunlight. In a society where most people were brunette by genetics and soot by circumstance, the only path to angelic blonde was experimental. You begin with the ingredients list that could double as an exorcism: horse urine, sulphur, alum, ash, and, if the apothecary was feeling fancy, a little vinegar to activate the mixture. Each ingredient chosen not for safety, but for its ability to convince your hair it no longer wished to live. You pour the blend into a small pot and heat it over the fire until it hisses like an opinionated snake. The smell is instructional, a sharp, acrid perfume that suggests both devotion and livestock. Still, you persist. Beauty, after all, is just cleanliness with more suffering. To protect your clothes, you wrap yourself in an old linen sheet, the medieval salon cape. Then, with trembling faith, you dip a rag into the warm potion and work it through your hair. Steam rises. The scent of sulphur fills the room. You catch your reflection in the metal mirror and realise you're now the kind of woman people see in visions and assume is a warning. The next step is sunlight, because no bleach works without divine assistance. So you step outside into the courtyard and tilt your head toward heaven like an offering. The winter light is thin but merciless. It bakes the mixture into your scalp, releasing the full bouquet of regret. The neighbours avert their eyes, not out of politeness, but because the smell travels faster than gossip. You wait. 15 minutes, then 30. The sensation shifts from warmth to burning, from burning to philosophy. At some point you stop feeling anything at all, which is probably spiritual progress. After an hour, you rinse it out with cold water drawn from the well. The steam rises as the water hits your head, hissing like penance. When the mixture finally runs clear, your hair feels lighter, not just in colour, but in density, as several sections have chosen an early retirement. You comb it gently, or as gently as one can with medieval combs made of bone and optimism. Some strands break, others cling together in sticky defiance. But in the dim afternoon light, there it is, a faint golden shimmer, the reward for alchemical perseverance. If you're lucky, the tone is soft and honey-like. If not, it's closer to the colour of despair and uneven orange that medieval poets called holy flame. Either way, you've achieved transformation. Of course, not everyone uses the heavy mixture. The gentler souls, often monks and maidens too poor or too cautious for full chemistry, opt for herbal rinses. Rosemary for gloss, sage for strength, chamomile for subtle lightening. It smells heavenly, which immediately makes it less trustworthy. No one believes holiness comes without a stench. Still, these herbal alternatives offer small mercies. You can brew them by boiling handfuls of dried leaves in wine or vinegar, then letting your hair steep like penitent's tea. The result is mild shine and the faint illusion of health, a small rebellion against the dominant trend of self-immolation. Meanwhile, in noble courts, bleaching becomes a ritual spectacle. Women gather in sunlight with wide-brimmed straw hats, tops cut away so the hair can dangle through like crops in a strange harvest. Servants brush on layers of urine and lemon water, timing exposure by prayers rather than clocks. They call it sunning the soul. You can almost hear the saints weeping. Whether from compassion or the smell, no one is sure. In taverns, rumours circulate of girls who went too far, whose hair crumbled to ash, whose scalps blistered like parchment. They say one pilgrim's hair caught fire during Lent, and the locals declared it a miracle until they realised she was still screaming. It didn't stop anyone. If anything, it proved the bleach worked. The irony is perfect. Everyone wants to look closer to divine light, yet the closer they get, the more it burns. It's a theology of vanity, salvation through combustion. By evening, your hair is dry, brittle, and slightly less cooperative than straw. But it glows. In the flicker of candlelight, you look almost angelic, provided the angel had recently lost a fight with a forge. You tie it back with a ribbon, proud and faintly dizzy. Tomorrow you'll rinse with rosemary to soothe the scalp, whispering thanks to whichever saint handles follicular endurance. For now you sit by the window, breathing in the faint trace of smoke and herbs. The air still hums with sulphur and faith. You think about how the world rewards suffering that photographs well, and you can't help but smile, carefully of course, to avoid cracking your forehead mask. By this point, your forehead gleams like moonlight on marble, and your hair, though faintly singed, now carries the faint shimmer of divine negligence. You've plucked, bleached, and burned your way toward perfection. Naturally, it's time to cover it all up, because nothing says holiness like hiding the evidence of your suffering. In medieval Europe, a woman's veil was both fashion and theology, a thin line of fabric separating the virtuous from the merely visible. The church called it modesty, society called it decency. Historians looking back call it layered hypocrisy with excellent drapery. The rules were strict and inconsistent, which is how you know they were written by men. Married women were expected to cover their hair completely, because uncovered hair was said to awaken sinful thoughts. Whose thoughts? Irrelevant. Moral architecture rarely bothered with specifics, so you wrap your newly purified head in a fine linen coif, the kind that scratches lightly at the temples and leaves you perpetually aware of your own piety. If you're wealthy, you layer it with silk or lace. If you're poor, it's wool, thicker, heavier, and twice as penitential. The veil must conceal every strand of hair, because each strand apparently has ambitions, At night, you keep it on while sleeping, lest your hair, in some act of midnight rebellion, tempt angels. Wives wear caps to bed to prove devotion, even when their husbands are snoring loudly enough to scare away sin itself. The morning begins not with sunlight, but with adjusting fabric that has welded itself to your forehead. In noble courts, the veil becomes an art form, layers upon layers, folded like theological origami. Some women wear long trailing veils that sweep behind them like portable clouds of chastity. Others wrap theirs tightly, framing the face in soft folds, turning modesty into a kind of performance art. The richer you are, the more material you're allowed to hide beneath. Colours too carry meaning. Pure white for virgins and nuns, subtle creams and greys for wives and for widows, deep black because nothing says mourning like being invisible in plain sight. Sumptuary laws even dictate which fabrics each class can wear. Fine silk for nobility, coarse wool for commoners. A poor woman in silk risks a fine or a sermon. A rich woman in wool risks being mistaken for kind. Of course, men also had their codes. Priests wore hoods as symbols of humility. Knights wore coifs of chainmail for virtue and decapitation insurance. But no one accused them of seducing the clergy by accident. The veil ultimately wasn't about protection. It was about control, a portable boundary between morality and misinterpretation. By hiding your hair, you made yourself safe from judgment, though never from gossip. Still, there was a practical side. A good veil protected your scalp from the sun, your curls from lice, and your pride from wind. It kept dust out and heat in, which was convenient when your house lacked insulation and your neighbours lacked distance. You can tell a lot about a person by their veil, how it's folded, how it's pinned, how much of the forehead it dares to show. A slightly shorter veil might suggest boldness or worse, personality. Rumour spreads faster than plague in small parishes, and both begin with a cough. Sometimes, though, the veil slips. You lean too far at the well, or a gust of wind plays theologian. Someone catches a glimpse of your golden hair and gasps, not from beauty, but from doctrinal panic. By supper, the story will have grown. You didn't just uncover your hair, you invited demons to dinner. It's comforting, in a way, to know the Middle Ages invented small-town scandal long before social media. In paintings, veiled women gaze downward, eyes soft, hands clasped, eternal symbols of submission and serenity. In life, they mostly squint through layers of fabric, trying to see where they're walking. The poetic image of purity rarely accounted for practicalities like stairs, mud, or breathing. Yet beneath the linen lies quiet defiance. Every stitch and fold is its own form of control, not surrender, but survival. By mastering the rules, women turned them into armour. The veil became a shield, soft but strategic, granting privacy in a world that demanded visibility. You tie yours tightly before bed. The linen smells faintly of smoke, rosemary, and human effort. You can feel every fibre pressing gently against your temples, the weight of piety literalized. Outside, the night air hums with distant bells. Inside, your scalp itches faintly, a reminder that even holiness needs to breathe. And as you drift towards sleep, wrapped in faith, fabric, and the faint sound of your own discomfort, one truth remains clear. Virtue, like beauty, is mostly about maintenance. By now, your forehead could host a sunrise, your hair smells faintly of divine chemistry, and your veil sits firmly in place, whispering modesty into the air. You would think the job's done. But no, medieval beauty had one last frontier, the geometry of what remained visible. Welcome to the era of eyebrows and beards, where every line, curve and whisker carried theological weight. Let's start with the brows, those twin witnesses of your soul. In the 14th and 15th centuries, the ideal woman had bare, smooth arches, or better yet, none at all. Eyebrows apparently distracted men from salvation and were therefore shaved, plucked, or scorched into oblivion. It's difficult to overstate how committed people were to removing parts of their own face in the name of chastity. The same quicklime paste that ate through hairlines now took aim at the brow ridge. A little too long, and you could watch your eyelids join the cause. Doctors warned against it. Priests frowned upon it, but artists adored it. That pure, uninterrupted expanse between eyes and scalp, where thought was supposed to dwell. The result? Portraits full of faces so serene they looked barely sentient. It wasn't just women. Men, too, joined the geometry club, though with more hair and less subtlety. Beards became maps of morality. A short, neat beard said piety. A long, unkempt one said wisdom. A total absence said trouble. The church was torn. Christ had a beard, which made it holy. But vanity about the beard was vanity nonetheless. So men split the difference. They styled their holiness carefully, shaping devotion with a razor made from anxiety. Monks, of course, avoided the problem entirely by shaving their heads and chins alike, creating a look we might call minimalist faith. Knights preferred trimmed chins and serious moustaches, good for both kissing rings and muffling dissent. Meanwhile, troubadours grew flowing curls that framed their faces like parentheses around a sonnet, each hair apparently a syllable of longing. As for you, sitting in your small wooden room with a mirror of polished tin, you take up your tweezers, bone, delicate, and poorly designed for forgiveness. You begin with precision, plucking away the soft outline of your brow, whispering quiet apologies to God for every act of aesthetic pride. It stings, the skin reddens, but progress demands casualties. Soon your reflection blinks back, expressionless, forehead rising in infinite grace. You look perpetually surprised, which in fairness is the correct reaction to medieval beauty culture. Outside, men gather at the barber's shop, the medieval hybrid of surgeon, gossip hub, and moral judge. The barber's pole spins its red and white symbolism of bloodletting, and the conversation turns to beard length. Too long, someone says, and lice finds sanctuary. Too short, another warns, and people mistake you for a sinner, or worse, a student. They all nod solemnly, each defending his chin like a knight guarding his crest. Across town, a preacher gives a sermon warning that women who shape their brows invite the devil's hand to guide the pluck. He has, coincidentally, the neatest beard in the parish. For the average peasant, none of this matters much. Their brows are hidden beneath grime and survival, their beards unplanned but entirely practical. In the cold months, a beard is a scarf you don't have to sew. In the summer, it's a small ecosystem for breadcrumbs and dignity. But among the privileged, grooming becomes a language. To maintain your face correctly is to declare both rank and restraint. A high forehead says intellect. A veil says humility. A missing eyebrow says, I have read poetry and regretted it. And a carefully shaped beard says, God likes me best. By evening, your skin still burns faintly from the tweezers. You dab it with rose water and a whisper of pride. The air smells faintly of herbs and soot, and somewhere outside a lute sighs its approval. You catch your reflection again, your face smoothed into geometry, balance between saint and ghost. There's something oddly peaceful about it. No expression to betray hunger, fear, or laughter. Just calm, eternal symmetry. It's the kind of face that painters love, philosophers praise, and real people avoid making eye contact with. Tomorrow, perhaps you'll let a single brow hair grow back. A quiet rebellion that no one will notice but you. A reminder that beneath all this order, the body still insists on being human. For now, though, your transformation is complete. You've polished, peeled, and plucked your way into respectability. You look like someone who could explain theology while slowly fainting from blood loss. And that, in medieval terms, is the pinnacle of beauty. You've survived lead, lime, and theology. Your skin glows faintly, either from holiness or mild chemical trauma. Naturally, the next logical step would be to take a bath. Except in the Middle Ages, that was precisely the problem. Bathing, you see, wasn't just hygiene. It was temptation with plumbing. For a few centuries, public bathhouses were Europe's equivalent of social media, crowded, addictive, and morally confusing. You didn't just wash there. You gossiped, flirted, traded news, and occasionally contracted enlightenment, or something similar. The church noticed. The church always notices. And so began one of history's strangest crusades, the War on Cleanliness. It started innocently enough. Priests warned that shared baths led to spiritual impurity. They had a point. Bathhouses often doubled as taverns, restaurants, and, depending on the hour, unlicensed confessionals. You could soak in rosemary water while listening to a merchant complain about taxes, and a monk lose faith in both theology and temperature control. But when the plague arrived in the 14th century, things escalated. Doctors decided that hot water opened the pores, which in their defence it does, and through those pores, miasmas could sneak in, bringing sin, sickness, and small talk. Suddenly, soap was suspicious, and dirt became divine armour. You, standing in your modest wooden tub, are now a public health risk. Steam curls around you like a guilty thought. The candle flickers. Somewhere outside, a bell tolls ominously. You pause mid-scrub, wondering whether the bubbles count as pride. Still, people bathed, because filth, even holy filth, has limits. Bathhouses remained popular, especially in cities. Imagine a large room filled with tubs, candles, laughter, and steam so thick you could baptize yourself by accident. Men and women often shared spaces, though divided by a flimsy curtain, or in some generous establishments, moral hope. Attendants poured hot water, offered spiced wine, and sometimes advice you didn't ask for. Bathing was supposed to purify body and soul. Unfortunately, it also purged inhibitions. Chroniclers complained that good Christians left clean but not improved, which is the medieval way of saying everyone got a little too comfortable with each other. In Paris, laws attempted to regulate bathhouse hours. In London, preachers condemned them as dens of lust and plague. Naturally, attendance soared, because nothing attracts a crowd faster than a sermon against fun. The wealthy bathed privately, of course, or at least pretended to. Nobles filled great wooden tubs with herbs and milk, sometimes even wine, on the theory that if you couldn't drink your fortune, you could at least bathe in it. Queen Isabel reportedly soaked in violets to soften her skin. Peasants, meanwhile, soaked in anything that didn't bite back. You might not have soap, but you have substitutes. Ashes from the hearth, mixed with lard, make a fine scrub. A handful of sage or thyme adds fragrance, and convinces the neighbours you're preparing stew instead of washing. If you're lucky, a friendly apothecary sells perfumed oil made from olive fat and crushed rose petals. You apply it to your shoulders, smell briefly divine, and attract every flea within 20 feet. The moral confusion of bathing reached its peak when monks began debating whether washing the face counted as vanity. One faction argued that cleanliness honoured God. The other countered that it merely revealed the flesh, which was rude. By the late 15th century, moderation won out. Washing was fine, provided you didn't enjoy it. So you keep your bath brief, just enough to scrape off visible guilt. The water cools quickly, turning cloudy with effort and faintly theological. You climb out shivering, wrapped in a linen towel stiff enough to qualify as penance. Outside, the air smells of smoke, yeast, and humanity. A passing priest gives you a suspicious glance. You're too clean. The implication is clear. Something happened, and it wasn't prayer. By nightfall, you feel the return of medieval normalcy, a comforting layer of dust, a faint sheen of moral ambiguity. The church relaxes. Society approves. You've rejoined the community of the unwashed faithful, and as you lie in bed, your skin cooling. You realise that cleanliness here isn't next to godliness at all. It's next to gossip, temptation, and worst of all, hygiene innovation. Still, the experience leaves a strange aftertaste of luxury, the rare memory of feeling human beneath the grime. You'll probably risk it again next month, if not for health, then for hope. After all, sin may stain, but dirt always comes back. You've survived another moral bath, which is to say you're clean enough to offend the church and still dirty enough to fit in. Naturally, you need a way to preserve this fragile equilibrium, to smell like virtue without attracting divine attention. Enter the medieval perfume, the art of bottling repentance. Perfume in the Middle Ages wasn't a cosmetic, it was a statement. I haven't bathed, but I have options. The ingredients list reads like something discovered during an exorcism. Civet scraped from the glands of a small angry cat. Ambergris, a waxy lump of whale intestine politely called floating gold. And musk, which came from a deer that had a particularly bad week. Add a little goat fat for texture, and congratulations. You smell like money that's been left near a stable too long. The rich loved it. Perfume wasn't about masking odour, it was about class. Each drop declared that you were important enough to import the essence of distant suffering. Bottles were made of coloured glass, tiny and exquisite, hung from silk ribbons or chained to belts. In crowded feasts or churches, nobles lifted their vials to their noses like holy relics, inhaling courage before another sermon about modesty. You of course can't afford ambergris. Your version comes from local goat fat infused with rosemary and smoke. You apply it behind your ears, hoping the combination says pious yet approachable instead of recently on fire. The result is layered. At first there's a sweetness from the herbs, a brief moment of dignity. Then the animal undertone rises, earthy, insistent, unforgettable. It's less garden in spring and more pilgrimage in July. Still, it works, because medieval noses were already accustomed to an orchestra of scents: tallow candles, horse dung, wood smoke, mildew, incense, ale, and ambition. Compared to that, you're practically fragrant. Perfume was also believed to protect against disease, especially during plague years. Doctors swore that sweet smells could ward off miasmas, those invisible clouds of corruption said to float through the air seeking moral weakness. A dab of musk behind the ear might not save your lungs, but it did keep people at a polite distance, which had roughly the same effect. In cities like Paris and Venice, perfume became both industry and art. Alchemists experimented with distillation, mixing rose petals with oils, gums, and occasionally mercury, because no medieval recipe was complete without risk. Royal courts developed signature scents, guarded as family secrets. Kings had perfumers the way generals had spies. The church, predictably, was conflicted. Perfume was luxurious, yes, but it was also used in religious rituals. Incense symbolised prayer rising to heaven, while frankincense masked the less celestial odours of large congregations. Thus, scent was holy, provided you didn't enjoy it too much. The result was a curious double standard. Priests burned incense by the bucketful, while noble women doused themselves in oils, each claiming sanctity by aroma. The air of a medieval cathedral often smelled like equal parts devotion and deodorant. Some perfumes even had names that blended piety with poetry. Angel's water, Venus dew, Tears of the Virgin. Most of them contained wine, vinegar, and optimism. They were sold as miracle tonics to ward off plague, whiten skin, and occasionally improve marriage prospects. Only one of those claims was even remotely possible. There were, of course, accidents. A spilled vial could stain clothing for weeks. Ambergris mixed with sunlight could melt jewellery. Civet could attract stray cats with unsettling enthusiasm. And yet, no one stopped. The logic was irresistible. If the world stank, smelling differently meant victory. At feasts, the perfumed elite sat together, their combined scent forming an atmosphere that historians would later call dense. Servants circulated, trying not to breathe too deeply. Guests praised one another's heavenly fragrance, knowing full well they were describing sanctified rot. You, meanwhile, step outside your hut, the wind carrying your modest rosemary concoction. For a moment it mixes with the smell of wet earth and firewood. It isn't bad, cleaner than sin, dirtier than virtue. You take a deep breath and almost feel civilized. The irony, of course, is that the more perfume you wear, the less human you smell. And in a world terrified of the flesh, that might be the point. To smell like something other than yourself. To be closer to heaven by chemical proxy. So you tie your vial around your wrist and let it swing like a charm against the stench of mortality. A reminder that in the medieval struggle between purity and decay, scent was the only side still winning. When perfume failed to wash away sin and bathing became heresy with bubbles, there was still one last method to cleanse the soul, by letting some of it out. In medieval medicine, blood wasn't just a bodily fluid, it was a mood, a season, and a lifestyle choice. Doctors believed beauty depended on balance, the proper harmony of the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Too much of any one and you were unappealing, unhealthy, or occasionally possessed. The solution was simple: remove the excess until you looked appropriately miserable again. You visit the local physician, a man whose qualifications include owning a knife and an opinion. He studies your face, nods gravely, and declares you too sanguine. This, he explains, means you're cheerful, flushed, and therefore in need of immediate correction. Apparently, joy itself is a medical emergency. He prepares the tools of the trade: a brass basin, a bundle of leeches, and a rag that might once have been clean. The leeches come from a nearby swamp, the kind that breeds optimism in exactly no one. He selects one with professional affection and presses it gently to your arm. You feel the first bite, a cold, deliberate kiss of science. Within moments, the creature fattens, wriggling with satisfaction. Your blood flows, your pulse slows, and the physician smiles, delighted by your newfound paleness. He calls it a fresh complexion. You call it vision tunneling. If you're lucky, the session ends after a few ounces. If not, he continues until you faint, a sure sign the treatment is working. When you wake up, the floor looks different, and so does your reflection. Pale, ethereal, and spiritually malnourished. Perfection. Bloodletting, of course, wasn't just for women. Knights bled to calm their tempers. Monks bled to avoid temptation, and nobles bled recreationally. Some scheduled sessions with the same enthusiasm modern people reserve for spa days. A good bleeding could cost a small fortune, but the results were immediate: dizziness, nausea, and the kind of pallor poets wrote about. Leeches weren't the only option. If you disliked worms but enjoyed pain, the barber surgeon could use a lancet instead. He'd make a neat slice along your arm, catch the blood in a cup, and reassure you that your bad humours were escaping in an orderly fashion. To prevent infection, he might apply vinegar, ashes, or divine hope. Sometimes the bleeding itself was followed by a relaxing purge or an enema, because nothing says inner beauty like interior regret. Texts from the period advised women to bleed at specific times of year to maintain their feminine balance. Spring and autumn were ideal. Winter bleeding risked freezing mid-process. Those in pursuit of radiance were told to bleed from the ankle, never the wrist, because the wrist was too emotional. It's unclear who decided that, but the rule stuck. The logic went further. Freckles. Too much heat in the blood. Bleed it. Acne. Excess moisture. Bleed it. Mood swings. Clearly an imbalance. Bleed it twice. It's remarkable how many medieval medical problems were solved by removing the patient entirely. You, of course, follow advice diligently. After your session, you're instructed to rest, eat boiled vegetables, and avoid sunlight, laughter, and thinking too hard. You lie in bed, lightheaded but serene, your complexion now the colour of theological parchment. The physician congratulates you on your progress. He warns that if you feel faint again, it's either divine grace or a recurrence of bile, both treatable with additional bleeding. Some women even combined bloodletting with beauty masks. Apply leeches to the cheeks, they said, for instant colour and long-term memory loss. Others saved a few drops in glass bottles as proof of moral improvement, beauty preserved like jam. Of course, not everyone was convinced. Skeptics pointed out that most patients looked worse after treatment. But in the medieval mind, suffering was evidence, not failure. If it hurt, it was working. If it nearly killed you, you were closer to sainthood than ever. As dusk falls, you rise unsteadily from your bed. Your limbs feel lighter. Your thoughts float pleasantly in circles. In the mirror, your face gleams pale and calm, drained of all worldly concerns and conveniently half your hemoglobin. You look delicate, a word that, in this century, doubles as diagnosis. You wrap a linen cloth around your arm, smile faintly, and whisper a prayer of thanks to the humours for their cooperation. Outside, the air smells of iron and herbs. You breathe deeply, quietly proud. You've achieved that most elusive of medieval ideals, the appearance of health through the absence of it. You've plucked your forehead, bleached your hair, drained your blood, and offended most branches of medicine. Naturally, the next frontier of beauty lies inside your mouth. Because in medieval Europe, a smile could still be considered a social risk. Teeth, to put it kindly, were an afterthought. They weren't meant to sparkle. They were meant to survive long enough to chew bread and occasionally gossip. But even that was ambitious. The average medieval diet was basically a dental apocalypse. Every loaf of bread was half food, half sandpaper. Flour was ground between millstones, leaving fine bits of grit that embedded themselves in dough like tiny geological surprises. Each bite wore the enamel thinner, smoothing teeth into polite little tombstones. By the age of 30, most people smiled like saints in paintings, serene, closed-mouthed, and vaguely pained. Still, the wealthy tried to care, not out of vanity but out of habit. Grooming had become an industry and neglect was peasant behaviour. So you begin your oral ritual, a delicate process combining faith, wine, and sheer optimism. Step 1. The tooth powder. A delightful mixture of ashes, salt, crushed mint, and sometimes ground bone or eggshell. It whitens, they say, though mostly by scraping off anything darker than honesty. You apply it with a rag, rubbing each tooth until your gums protest. Blood appears, the medieval sign of cleanliness. If it doesn't sting, you're not doing it right. Step 2. The rinse. Mouthwash as we know it didn't exist, but medieval ingenuity fills every void. A cup of red wine makes an excellent antiseptic, assuming you spit afterward, which no one ever does. Why waste it? Vinegar is another option, though less popular among those who wish to keep their teeth attached. You swirl it around your mouth, feel the acid, bite, and consider confession. For the wealthy, imported cloves and cinnamon were added to sweeten breath. The spices came from distant ports, costing as much as jewellery, which made halitosis a matter of class distinction. If your breath smelled like roasted lamb and despair, you were mortal. If it smelled like cloves, you were practically divine. Of course, the church had opinions. Anything too fragrant was vanity. But priests also used incense to sanctify the air, which meant the argument was largely one of branding. Divine smell, acceptable. Personal hygiene, suspicious. Tooth care extended beyond powder and prayer. Some used linen floss, thin threads looped between teeth to remove debris, an act of courage, considering most linen doubled as clothing or shrouds. A few medical manuals recommended rubbing teeth with wool soaked in honey to prevent decay. It worked beautifully, if your goal was to attract every insect in Christendom. Dentistry, when things went wrong, was handled by the same man who cut your hair, drained your blood, and possibly built your chair, the barber surgeon. His tools were simple: forceps, tongs, and persuasive strength. He would heat the metal in the fire, offer a prayer for steadiness, and remove the problem, or most of it. Anesthesia consisted of holding still and rethinking your decisions. Sometimes, a wandering tooth drawer would set up in the market square. He advertised with a small pile of extracted evidence and a large bottle of ale. Customers lined up bravely, knowing the price of pain relief was usually infection. Still, it was cheaper than prayer. For everyone else, prevention was the only hope. You rinse daily, eat slowly, and try not to bite anything harder than your faith. When food lodges between your teeth, you pick it out discreetly with a chicken bone. A common tool, slightly less fatal than the alternative. Despite the effort, decay comes early. Lead makeup, poor diet, and iron deficiency do the rest. A dark spot appears, then spreads like a secret. Before long, another tooth goes missing, but society is merciful. People rarely smile anyway. Laughter was unseemly, and happiness was never fashionable for long. By candlelight, you examine your reflection in a small piece of polished tin. The teeth that remain are serviceable. They bear the colour of bread crust and endurance. You rinse one last time with wine, purely for antiseptic purposes, and feel a brief, dizzy warmth. Outside, the night air smells of ash and cloves. You exhale, and for a fleeting moment your breath carries the ghost of a vineyard. It almost feels like civilization. Somewhere in the distance, church bells toll. You smile, carefully, and the candlelight glints off your teeth like relics, imperfect, worn, and stubbornly alive. Because in the end, the medieval ideal wasn't about beauty at all. It was about surviving your own reflection with a straight face. By now, you have the complexion of divinity, the hair of an alchemist's accident, and the smile of someone who's met several barbers and lived to regret it. You've plucked, powdered, and purified. Naturally, the church begins to worry, because in the medieval imagination, vanity was a door, and every door led somewhere unpleasant. It began, as these things often did, with sermons, long echoing warnings delivered to audiences too polite to yawn. Priests thundered that mirrors were gateways of pride, portals through which Satan himself might enter your reflection. One Dominican preacher wrote that, "A woman gazing too long at herself sees not her face but temptation looking back," which is poetic if you ignore how convenient it was for the man not holding the mirror. You sit in the pew, freshly scrubbed, listening as your priest rails against cosmetics. Each example hits uncomfortably close. Painted cheeks, deceit, perfume, lust, smooth skin, proof of moral weakness. The only acceptable complexion apparently is ashen with fear. But the irony is delicious, because even as they condemn vanity, the clergy surround themselves with reflected beauty. Polished chalices, gilded crosses, and cathedral floors that shine like sanctified mirrors. God's house gleams, but yours mustn't. The sermon continues, voice rising with conviction. He warns that mirrors are tools of the devil, drawing the soul towards sin through idle admiration. Someone in the back coughs politely. Someone else adjusts their veil, wondering how exactly they're supposed to check for lice now. Outside, the world is full of surfaces pretending not to be mirrors. Still water, polished armour, metal dishes. Reflection is everywhere, unavoidable, which means sin is too. You could live in constant vigilance, or you could accept that perhaps Satan has bigger problems. Still, fear spreads faster than common sense. In many towns, mirrors become luxury contraband, owned only by nobles and apothecaries, stored carefully under cloth. To gaze into one for too long is considered a moral indulgence, like gambling or literacy. You're meant to examine your conscience, not your eyebrows. Of course, people adapt. A polished brass pan works just as well, and the church hasn't exorcised cookware yet. Women check their faces discreetly while stirring porridge. Men shine their helmets until they can admire their righteousness from every angle. The hypocrisy is practical, not malicious. Even priests need to know when there's ink on their nose. In the noble courts, the sermon's message takes a fashionable detour. Vanity isn't condemned, it's refined. Mirrors become smaller, framed with ivory, meant to reflect just enough to look holy. Ladies gaze not at themselves, but at the reflection of their veils, which apparently doesn't count. A clever loophole in both theology and logic. Meanwhile, theologians debate the soul's visibility in reflection. Some insist that mirrors reveal only flesh. Others argue that the soul hides somewhere near the eyes, like a nervous tenant. A few radicals suggest that to reject mirrors entirely is to reject God's craftsmanship. They are quietly reassigned to monasteries specializing in silence. You, of course, keep your mirror hidden under your pillow, a small disc of polished tin, hardly worth damnation. At night, when candles burn low and sermons fade, you sometimes lift it just to see if you still exist. The face that stares back is tired, powdered, and slightly uneven, but it's yours, and after a day spent obeying every command about humility, it's oddly comforting to find something still defiant staring back. In the distance, church bells toll for vespers. The air smells faintly of incense and smoke, holiness with a hint of mould. You imagine your priest polishing his silver chalice, admiring its glow in the candlelight. You imagine God, perhaps, doing the same with the moon, and you think, quietly, heretically, that reflection isn't pride at all. It's proof you haven't disappeared. So you hide the mirror again, just in case, and whisper a prayer that your next confession will be brief, not for your vanity, but for your honesty. If mirrors revealed too much, clothing was designed to hide it again, because in the Middle Ages morality wasn't just preached, it was tailored. You lived in a world where what you wore was legally regulated, spiritually monitored, and socially dissected. Fashion, in short, was a crime scene. Sumptuary laws dictated exactly who could wear what and how. They were written, amended, and enforced by people who clearly enjoyed lists more than laundry. The goal, officially, was to preserve order, to prevent peasants from pretending to be noble, and nobles from pretending to be tasteful. A peasant in silk could be fined for vanity. A merchant in velvet could be fined for optimism. Only clergy were allowed both luxury and hypocrisy. So you begin your morning not by choosing an outfit, but by remembering which materials you're legally allowed to touch. Wool, safe. Linen, acceptable. Velvet, sin with texture. Fur, depends on the animal, the season, and who's watching. There were even rules about colour. Deep blues and purples, expensive dyes extracted from distant shells, belonged to royalty. Green was respectable but risky. It faded too easily, like virtue under scrutiny. Yellow, the colour of vanity and jealousy, was reserved for sinners, foreigners, and the occasionally fashionable. Black, ironically, was the mark of either mourning or wealth, depending on how clean it was. A noble might own 6 gowns of scarlet and 1 conscience, a peasant, 2 tunics, and a dream. Tailors lived in constant fear of divine retribution and legal audits. Some confessed more about seams than sins. In one recorded case, a tailor in Florence told his priest, "Forgive me, father, for I hemmed above my station." The priest absolved him, provided he unpicked the thread. It's unclear who suffered more, the tailor or the customer now exposed to daylight. Fashion policing didn't stop at fabric. Accessories were moral statements. Gold buttons, pride, silver clasps, pretension, a belt too ornate, blasphemy with buckle, shoes too pointy, lust, obviously. Apparently virtue had square toes, and heaven help the woman whose sleeves trailed on the floor. They were considered both impractical and sinful, which, to be fair, describes most fashion trends. Some towns even banned trains longer than your own patience. In sumptuary law, modesty was measured in inches and enforced by gossip. Meanwhile, the clergy delivered sermons equating expensive clothes with moral decay. "Adorn not thy body," they said, while wearing robes embroidered with enough gold to blind a peasant at 20 paces. The faithful listened, nodded, and promptly commissioned new outfits for Sunday. Of course, these laws were rarely obeyed, or rather, they were obeyed creatively. Nobles found loopholes faster than monks found metaphors. A forbidden fur could be renamed a moral lining. Gold trim could be called sun thread. One French lady reportedly wore pearls sewn inside her gown so she could feel rich without anyone knowing. Except, naturally, everyone did. The enforcement was absurd. Inspectors roamed markets, examining hems and cuffs for evidence of spiritual ambition. Tailors swore oaths, women bribed quietly, and men blamed their wives. Punishments ranged from fines to confiscation, which was awkward when your guilt was tailored to fit. For the poor, fashion served a different function: camouflage. A simple tunic, plain belt, and mud ensured invisibility. In a world obsessed with status, being unnoticed was the truest form of safety. But the rich couldn't stop. The more the church condemned extravagance, the more elaborate it became. One chronicler wrote that ladies of Florence wore sleeves large enough to hide envy itself. Another described men in hats so tall, their thoughts required ladders. It wasn't just vanity, it was theology. Sumptuary order was meant to reflect divine hierarchy. Kings near heaven, peasants near mud. Your outfit, quite literally, mirrored the cosmos. You were a constellation stitched in wool, orbiting the nearest noble. As dusk falls, you sit by the fire, mending your sleeve with quiet defiance. The thread is simple, the fabric rough, but the gesture feels almost sacred. Outside, a noblewoman glides past in scarlet silk, trailed by envy, admiration, and an unpaid tailor. You smile. Your wool smells faintly of smoke and honesty. You may not look divine, but at least you can breathe, which in this century counts as luxury. Because in the end, sumptuary law wasn't about holiness. It was about visibility, who got to shine, and who had to fade quietly into the background. You stitch the final seam and whisper the medieval mantra every commoner knows by heart. Better scratchy and safe than stylish and damned. If sumptuary laws tried to control beauty, the saints went one better. They abolished it. Because nothing confuses vanity quite like someone deliberately setting themselves on fire to prove a point. In the medieval imagination, holiness and ugliness were old friends. To be beautiful was to risk pride. To be plain was to be safe. And to be disfigured for God, well, that was practically a resume. Hagiographies, the medieval celebrity profiles of saints, loved this paradox. They described radiant young women pursued by unwanted suitors, then, to preserve their purity, ruining their faces in spectacular fashion. A saint's beauty wasn't meant to inspire admiration. It was a trap to be escaped. St. Agnes, for example, was praised for her luminous skin until she refused marriage, angered a noble, and was burned alive for it. The chronicler, unfazed, noted that her face shone brighter than the flames, which may be history's earliest example of toxic positivity. St. Clare, meanwhile, cut her hair short to reject worldly vanity. She wasn't alone. In convents across Europe, scissors became instruments of piety. Monks shaved crowns, nuns shaved foreheads, and martyrs removed the rest. A good tonsure was worth a sermon, but some went further. A few saints deliberately disfigured themselves, slashing cheeks, scarring skin, even rubbing ash or quicklime into their faces so they would no longer tempt men. Their hagiographers described the results with unnerving enthusiasm. Her visage was no longer lovely, but her soul shone all the more. In short, she glowed, just not in the way skincare ads promise. For ordinary people, these tales were both inspiring and terrifying. They taught that true virtue was a kind of aesthetic extinction. To look holy, you had to look unwell. The line between sanctity and sepsis blurred beautifully. Meanwhile, artists struggled. How do you paint a saint who's famous for not being attractive? The solution was compromise. Depict her as radiant, but add a halo to show the difference. It worked. Every altar painting became a polite contradiction. Ugliness lit beautifully. The relic trade only deepened the irony. Devout pilgrims collected scraps of saints' clothing, locks of hair and, disturbingly often, flakes of skin. A pilgrim might travel for weeks to venerate a jawbone or the world's holiest scab. Some monasteries sold holy dust, scraped from tombs, guaranteed to cure vanity and, less conveniently, appetite. You naturally can't afford relics, but the stories linger. When you pass a mirror, you remember St. Elizabeth, who smeared ashes on her cheeks to mask her blush, or St. Marina, who disguised herself as a monk for 20 years. Their beauty was a threat to themselves. Your survival depends on pretending you don't have any. And yet, even the saints weren't immune to the contradictions of admiration. Pilgrims described them as luminous, serene, even beautiful in their ruin. The church condemned cosmetics, but canonized women whose scars became divine branding. Somehow, mutilation was moral, but makeup was sin. It's almost as if the problem wasn't beauty, but ownership. You think of this while stirring ash into your lamp oil, the faint grey swirl catching candlelight. The smell of smoke and beeswax fills the room, oddly comforting. In the corner, a painted icon stares back with unblinking calm. A saint's face, serene and spotless, the painter's idea of piety. You wonder how much pigment it took to make her look that humble. Outside, the night wind rattles shutters. Somewhere, a bell tolls for Compline, the hour of reflection, confession, and mild regret. You cross yourself automatically. In the silence that follows, the flickering candle makes your shadow bow beside you. It's easy to imagine that holiness might look like this, small, tired, and softly smudged. Tomorrow you'll wake, wash in cold water, and try to appear both humble and healthy. A dangerous balance in any century. But tonight, you let the candle burn down until the room smells like soot and salvation. You may never be saintly, but at least you understand the lighting. You wake before dawn, the candle burned down to a soft mound of wax, your room smelling faintly of ashes and last night's holiness. The saints, it seems, have set the tone. Purity through exhaustion, devotion through anemia. Because in the late Middle Ages, paleness wasn't just fashionable anymore, it was theological. To be pale was to be penitent. It meant your blood, appetite and opinions were all under control. It was a complexion that said, I have suffered productively. And so, a new beauty ideal emerged. The confessional complexion, a look achieved through fasting, prayer and limited circulation. Think of it as the original no-makeup trend, except everyone applauded if you fainted halfway through it. You begin your morning fast, which is not the modern kind involving juice and Instagram. Yours involves nothing but a cup of thin broth and an apology to your stomach. Meals are seen as worldly distractions. The soul must be fed instead. The church agrees, mostly because feeding the body requires money, and holiness is free if you ignore the medical bills. After a few weeks, your skin develops the desired translucence, cheekbones sharpen, dark circles bloom under your eyes like devotion in full flower. You look perpetually repentant, or possibly haunted, which works just as well. In convents, this pallor becomes a badge of honour. Sisters compare their complexions in whispers, like monks trading psalms. The palest among them are praised as pure vessels. The ones who still have colour are gently advised to reflect more deeply, preferably while kneeling. Medical texts, ever helpful, describe the ideal fasting glow as the one hue of sanctity. Physicians warn that too much abstinence can cause weakness, fainting, and death. Theologians nod approvingly. The overlap between spiritual achievement and malnutrition is disturbingly wide. You join the faithful rhythm of confession and communion, your body slowly adjusting to its own emptiness. Churches are cool, stone-lit spaces, filled with the scent of wax and incense. The air tastes of smoke and devotion. Dry, lingering, almost edible. You kneel, your stomach quietly negotiating a treaty with your spine. The priest asks the usual questions: pride, envy, gluttony. You shake your head, mostly because gluttony hasn't been an option in weeks. He blesses you, tells you to keep your faith strong and your portions small. Apparently, heaven has a dress code and a calorie limit. Outside, people gossip about miracles. Women whose skin gleams like alabaster, monks who glow faintly in candlelight. No one mentions that candlelight flatters everyone. Artists capture these holy faces, painting them smooth and colourless, with eyes that seem to look past the living entirely. Every portrait a quiet promise, salvation, but make it elegant. You try to imitate the effect, a few extra hours of fasting, a few more prayers whispered through lightheadedness. The hunger turns meditative after a while. You begin to mistake dizziness for transcendence, and frankly so does everyone else. There's beauty in it, in the strange stillness between heartbeat and faith. Each step feels deliberate, like walking through syrup made of air. Each sound echoes, the soft drip of wax, the flutter of robes, the faint rasp of your own breath. In the quiet, you realize holiness isn't about looking alive. It's about looking like you've already forgiven the idea. Still, you occasionally cheat. A sip of wine during confession to steady the nerves. A crust of bread to prevent fainting. The saints you're sure would understand. They always do. From their portraits, they seem entirely at peace with selective obedience. By evening, you sit near the church door, watching the light fade through stained glass. The reds and blues fall across your hands, tinting your pale skin like a temporary miracle. For a moment, you look alive again, touched by borrowed colour. It feels almost scandalous. The bell rings for Compline. You stand, bones clicking softly like prayer beads. Outside, the air smells of wet stone and wax, the world dimming into a kind of holy grayscale. You pull your shawl tighter and walk home slowly, faintly glowing from equal parts faith and fainting. In the distance, someone laughs, bright, full, human. It startles you. You realise how long it's been since beauty sounded like joy instead of hunger. But you keep walking, serene, pale, quietly perfect. The church will call it grace. You might call it survival. Either way, you've achieved the medieval ideal, a soul cleansed, a stomach empty, and a face the colour of forgiveness. You could say the Middle Ages believed in recycling. Not for the environment, of course, but for suffering. By the 15th century, the poisons of beauty had become the prescriptions of medicine. Doctors, the same ones who condemned vanity in public, quietly began using its ingredients to heal what vanity had ruined. It was the world's first closed-loop system of harm and optimism. Your skin, pale and brittle from years of lead powder, begins to crack. The sores sting. The mirror looks concerned. You go to a physician, hoping for relief, maybe a salve, definitely a lecture. He examines your face with solemn expertise and prescribes more lead. Apparently, like sin, the cure for poison was simply a higher dosage administered by someone with confidence. He mixes the remedy in a small brass bowl, vinegar, oil, and ground white lead. The same ingredients that caused the problem, Now blessed by the authority of medicine, he applies it gently with a feather, assuring you that healing sometimes burns before it begins. You believe him, because everything does. The salve tingles, then tightens, then hardens into a dull mask of medicinal progress. The smell is acrid, sweet, and faintly metallic, the scent of regret being sterilized. When it dries, your skin feels smoother, colder, and less alive. But the doctor nods approvingly, so it must be working. For inflammation, he recommends an ointment made from ground toads, dried and mixed with olive oil. Excellent for the complexion, he says, as though death by amphibian were an acceptable trade for radiance. Other apothecaries prefer crushed mice or powdered snakes, or in desperate cases ashes of dove's heart, because medicine and witchcraft were still debating custody. Each jar on the shelf promises something: purity, youth, or at least distraction. You leave the shop smelling faintly of vinegar and zoology. On the street the air feels brighter, almost hallucinatory. Your reflection in a puddle looks healthy, in the same way a statue looks awake. At home, you follow his instructions precisely. Apply twice daily. Avoid sunlight. Ignore the peeling. Within days, the redness fades, replaced by an elegant shade of bluish grey. Your friends compliment your improvement. You thank them, too tired to argue with irony. In truth, medicine has discovered a convenient rhythm. Cause, prescribe, repeat. Each ailment leads back to the same shelf, the same powder, the same uneasy faith in progress. Lead closes wounds it created. Mercury purifies what it poisoned. Vinegar soothes what it scorched. It's a system so symmetrical it almost looks intentional. Hospitals, such as they are, smell of herbs and decay. Beds line the walls, windows are small to keep out the air, which doctors still consider a moral hazard. Patients murmur prayers as leeches drip from their arms into bowls. Nurses, often nuns, move silently, half healer, half undertaker, each gesture practiced in both arts. The sound of soft chanting fills the corridors, mingled with the bubbling of boiling oils. It's oddly peaceful, like a choir rehearsing inside a cauldron. Your doctor visits weekly to admire his success. He praises the pallor of your skin, the stillness of your pulse, the serenity of your expression. Beauty returning, he says, while taking your payment in silver, which coincidentally is also mildly toxic. When you ask about the faint black lines appearing around your eyes, he frowns thoughtfully and prescribes more rest. And if rest doesn't help, there's always a new mixture, thicker and shinier than before, containing everything that's ever tried to kill you, now in smaller portions. Some call it science, others call it persistence. You call it maintenance. In taverns the gossip spreads, of noble women who glow faintly in candlelight, of apothecaries who sell miracle pastes, and of a bishop's niece whose face healed itself into perfection 2 days before her funeral. People nod sympathetically. Tragedy and beauty often arrive together, and one always photographs better. At night, you sit by the window, the jar of ointment glinting beside you. The moonlight hits it, and for a moment it looks like holy water. You dip your finger in, dab a little on the sore near your jaw, and feel the faint sting of progress. It's strangely comforting, this ritual of damage and renewal. Pain has become maintenance. Maintenance has become faith. In the quiet, you begin to realize the truth medieval medicine never quite admitted. No one really wanted to be cured. They wanted to keep participating in the illusion that healing was possible, that suffering, if refined properly, could still be elegant. The candle burns low, its flame reflected in the dark surface of the ointment jar. You stare into it for a long time, your face pale, smooth, and unconvincing. It's not health you've bought, it's continuation, and somehow that feels close enough. The medicine helps, in the way medieval medicine often does. by making you too tired to complain. Your skin stops burning, but only because feeling itself has given up. The doctor calls this a good sign. Still, the mirror disagrees. What once shimmered with the calm glow of lead now dulls into a faint mottled grey. A small patch of skin near your cheek turns dark, then green, then quietly gives up its position entirely. The rest of your face follows slowly, like plaster crumbling from an old fresco. It's not decay exactly. It's progress aging out of enthusiasm. Your friends whisper that you look paler, thinner, more saintly. You suspect they're confusing sanctity with necrosis. But no one dares mention it directly, not in polite company, and certainly not in confession. Because if sickness came from beauty, then admitting to either was an admission of pride. So you carry on. You powder over the lesions, patch the cracks, and smile with practiced serenity. The reflection that stares back is smooth, still, and entirely exhausted. A face assembled daily from faith and fragments. In taverns, the stories spread, the way stories always do when they smell faintly of tragedy. A noble woman in Venice who died with a complexion too perfect to bury. A merchant's wife in Rouen who slept beside her makeup chest and never woke again. A queen whose servants swore that even in death, her face glowed softly under the candlelight. Doctors called it divine grace. Everyone else called it arsenic. Still, the fashion endures, because beauty, once weaponized, refuses to retire. Women trade recipes in whispers, a safer ratio of vinegar to lead, a gentler mercury salve, a shade of powder that hides illness but not wealth. Apothecaries sell new and improved versions, now blessed with extra ingredients like powdered pearls or ground coral, minerals that at least look expensive while they're killing you. The church, as usual, hesitates between condemnation and commerce. Priests preach humility from pulpits that smell faintly of incense and ambergris. Confessors warn that vanity leads to ruin, and then discreetly recommend the names of physicians who cater to discreet repentance. Faith, like powder, settles into the cracks, but quietly a rebellion begins. Not loud, not organised, just tired. Some women stop bleaching their hair, some go without rouge, letting freckles and fatigue show. A few even refuse the mask altogether, walking into public with faces that simply belong to themselves. It isn't liberation exactly. More like a sigh that lasted a generation. They're mocked at first, of course, called slovenly, unfeminine, strange. But gossip softens over time, the way fashion always forgives the inevitable. Soon, natural beauty becomes its own form of artifice, as carefully curated as the poisons it replaced. Someone always finds a way to monetize rebellion. Still, for a brief moment, the illusion cracks. In taverns and marketplaces, you hear women laugh again. Loudly, unladylike, beautifully. Their cheeks flush with wine instead of mercury. Their hair smells like smoke instead of sulphur. Even the men look confused, unsure whether to be scandalized or relieved. It's hard to seduce someone who's finally comfortable. You join them one evening, sitting near the hearth with a mug of ale. The air is warm, thick with laughter and burnt bread. You catch your reflection in a pewter jug, pale, scarred, alive. Someone jokes about the latest beauty tonic, ground frog bones and olive oil for moral clarity. Everyone laughs, even you. The sound is hoarse, but it feels honest. In that moment, you realize beauty was never really about the mirror. It was about belonging to the living, not the perfect. And for the first time in years, your face moves without cracking. It isn't smooth, but it's yours. The ale tastes earthy, bitter, real. It burns slightly going down, the good kind of pain. Outside, the wind carries the scent of ash and rain. A storm is coming, and with it, a new century. But tonight, the tavern is loud and human. You look around, at scars, at smiles, at the quiet defiance of people too busy surviving to care about polish. and you feel something close to peace. Perfection, it turns out, dies quickly, but imperfection throws better parties. By the time the 15th century limps toward the Renaissance, the mirror has returned, clearer, brighter, sharper than ever. It had been exiled, condemned, and blamed for a century of moral decay, yet here it is again, gleaming smugly on the wall. Because humanity, it turns out, never really gives up on its favourite accomplice. The Venetians perfect the art of glass mirrors, crafting them on the island of Murano. Artisans blow molten glass, coat it with mercury, and produce reflections so crisp that for the first time in history, you can see every regret in high definition. It's a technological miracle, one that immediately revives all the problems the church had tried to bury under sermons. You buy one, of course. It costs more than a cow and slightly less than your dignity. But it hangs beautifully by the window, catching sunlight and secrets with equal enthusiasm. When you look into it, you no longer see a blur of tin and shadow. You see pores, wrinkles, and the faint ghosts of your choices. You stare, amazed, and briefly wish the glass were cloudier. Across Europe, the mirror industry explodes. Nobles commission mirrors the size of doors, merchants display them in shops as symbols of refinement, and painters begin studying reflections as metaphors for both vanity and enlightenment. For centuries, people had prayed to invisible gods. Now they pray to visible selves. The irony isn't lost on anyone. Even priests who once preached that mirrors lured souls to hell now check their collars before Mass. Confessionals acquire small mirrors disguised as brass panels for spiritual inspection. God, it seems, has excellent product placement, and with clearer glass comes clearer ambition. Women return to powders and rouge, now reformulated with slightly fewer toxins, or at least better branding. Beauty patches make a triumphant comeback, no longer hiding sores but signifying flirtation. Placed near the mouth, they mean wit. Near the eye, melancholy. Near the heart, availability. Society, ever creative, finds a way to make infection fashionable again. You sit before your mirror, brush in hand, and wonder if it's progress. The powder is lighter now, the smell sweeter, but the logic feels familiar. A face is still a canvas for other people's expectations. The difference is that now you can see every stroke in exquisite clarity. In Venice, perfumers claim that their new formulas contain nothing deadly. This is technically true, depending on your definition of deadly and your tolerance for mercury. Fashion journals circulate through courts, advising women on how to achieve a natural glow. No one mentions that the only natural glow most of them possess is the faint shine of early organ failure. Still, the Renaissance calls it progress. Pain is now art, and art, when expensive enough, is mistaken for wisdom. The mirror reflects it all. The shimmer, the sickness, the stubborn optimism of people determined to look better than they feel. You think of the old world, the smoky rooms, the vinegar jars, the prayers muttered between applications. You think of the saints who scarred their faces to escape attention, and the doctors who called poison remedy. And now, here you are, sitting under a skylight, repeating every ritual they swore was progress. The mirror, polite as ever, offers no opinion. It simply records the continuity of human hope. Sometimes at dusk the glass turns dim. The mercury behind it tarnishes, bleeding silver streaks like veins through ice. You watch your reflection blur again, the edges softening into something almost kind. For a brief moment, the mirror looks ancient, like a conscience remembering its job. You touch the surface lightly. It's cold, smooth, and mercifully vague. Behind it lies the same old question. Do we polish ourselves to feel closer to heaven, or just to avoid seeing the dust? Outside, the world glows with invention. Printing presses hum. Scholars debate planets. Artists paint the body as divine geometry. Everything is moving forward except human self-awareness, which, as usual, arrives fashionably late. The candle behind you flickers. For an instant your reflection doubles. Two faces overlapping, one weary, one idealized. You smile faintly. The glass trembles. And just like that you remember, the mirror always laughs last, because it never changes. Only you do. You wake to soft daylight, the kind that forgives everything. The mirror stands by the window, still intact, still waiting. For once, you don't rush toward it, because you already know what's there. The same face, the same faint traces of history, the quiet inheritance of everyone who ever believed that pain could be improved upon. Centuries have passed since the first woman mixed vinegar and led into hope. Empires rose, fell, and sold the rights to the recipe. Powders grew finer, creams gentler, promises shinier. But beneath it all, the same impulse hums, a small, stubborn wish to edit existence. Modern chemists call it innovation. Medieval doctors called it balance. The truth is, both meant the same thing: control. You study your reflection in the clean morning light. The face that once had to prove its virtue by suffering now has a different vocabulary: radiance, hydration, self-care. You no longer smear lead on your cheeks. You buy serums in smaller bottles. You no longer bathe in vinegar. You exfoliate gently, then repeat. The packaging has changed. The faith hasn't. You imagine your medieval counterpart, somewhere in the fog of time, sitting by candlelight with her jar of powder and her fragile optimism. You'd recognize each other instantly. The same careful gestures, the same whispered self-critique, the same hope that transformation could be moral, not just visible. The world has polished the mirror since then, but not the habit of looking too long into it. Beauty has always been a conversation between desire and fear. Desire says change. Fear says not too much. Together they invent civilization's favourite loop. Of course, progress has its victories. There are fewer toxins now and fewer sermons. The church has largely retired from the business of skincare. Doctors have moved on to other mysteries, though doctor-prescribed still sells better than no one knows why. Pain has simply learned to advertise. You tilt your head, sunlight glides across your face like a quiet absolution. Every pore, every freckle, every imperfection is a footnote in a history that never stopped repeating itself. The powders are gone, but the questions remain. What is worth keeping? What is worth hiding? What makes you feel real? It's strange, realizing that humanity has spent 1,000 years trying to look alive, as if the proof of existence required a mirror's permission. Maybe beauty was never about attraction at all. Maybe it was just a way of saying, I'm still here. You set the mirror down. The glass catches the light one last time. The faint shimmer of 1,000 vanished faces, all believing they were the final version. In that reflection, there's no condemnation, no laughter, just endurance. You feel oddly proud of them. The saints, the sinners, the powdered, the burned, the brave. They all wanted the same impossible thing, to make the fleeting feel permanent. The candle on your table trembles, then steadies. Outside, life continues in all its messy, unpolished glory. Children shout, pots clang, someone laughs too loudly. The air smells faintly of rain and bread, ordinary, mortal, forgiving. You breathe it in and smile, small and real. There's no powder, no pain, no sermon left. Just skin and light, both doing their best. You turn from the mirror. The reflection fades, but the warmth remains, and that somehow is how it all made sense back then. And that somehow is how it all made sense back then. If you're still awake, congratulations. You've survived another century. If you're asleep, even better. You've escaped it entirely. Either way, thank you for listening. for laughing softly, and for remembering that history was never clean, only determined. The powders have faded, the sermons have quieted, but the mirror, that old, faithful accomplice, is still waiting by the window, whispering the same old question: would you change anything if it finally stayed?